Welcome to Healthy Pets, Healthy Owners. I'm Dr. Edmund Sulkowski, and boy, do we have a wonderful show for you today. I think it's a topic that really needs to be addressed. It's very rarely ever discussed, but it should be in the forefront of all of our information so that we can actually identify what's going on with people that we may know that this is happening to. Let's welcome back to the show District Attorney from Washington County, Eugene Vittone. Gene, welcome.
Good to see you.
Always
Ed.
a pleasure to have
you
on the show. Gene
you.
was on Healthy Pets, Healthy People, the radio show that I have on AM 1250, and we actually discussed this topic, and I asked him if he could take the time out of his busy schedule, and it's a busy time of the year for you, I know,
Sure.
to come on to Healthy Pets, Healthy Owners and discuss this so that we make people aware of what's going on.
Thank you, Ed.
And I'd like to welcome Marie Christinis. Welcome.
Nice to see you.
Marie is the director of Washington County's Victim Services, and we're going to talk about elder abuse, elder scams, and scams in general that happen maybe even to all of us today. And this topic never goes on, but as far as discussion goes, people are not talking about it.
Yeah, frequently, Ed, these crimes occur in the dark, mainly because a lot of times the people are being victimized by their own family members. And it's really sad because, you know, when we run into these situations, what you'll see is that it's underreported because the people are reliant upon the very people that are victimizing them to get them the doctor's appointments, to the store, to the bank, to do things. Plus, it's just not being reported so that people are aware that people are being victimized. So that's part of the reason it's great that you have us on today, so we can increase awareness. We have some tips on how to report it and what you should do if you suspect it. And thank you for having us.
Well, again, it's always my pleasure, Gene. You do so much. I have to tell everybody, before I got involved with the Washington County Drug and Alcohol Coalition, I had a certain view of what a DA does, which was totally different than what I've been able to observe watching you over the last couple of years and what you do as a DA. And you do so much, and you're involved in so much in making the community a better place to live. It isn't just prosecuting somebody. And we're going to start in on this abuse and the signs and the age groups and so forth. I would just like you to give the audience a little idea of exactly what does a DA do?
Well, I mean, the prosecution of cases and assisting the police when they have questions regarding evidence, where to proceed with an investigation to make a determination whether a crime's occurred is obviously an important part of being a district attorney, but it's much more than just trying to send people to jail, because my job is actually to make sure everybody's rights are protected during the criminal process, including the defendant. One of the things that happened when I was first elected DA that we've talked about before, Ed, and that you're kind enough to help us with the coalition on, is the opioid epidemic that's come up and the deaths and the tragedy associated with that. Elder abuse is also a huge area of concern in Washington County due to the number of people that we have in Washington County that are over the age of 60 and fall into the category of protected people. But Ed, you're very kind in crediting me with this, but what I have is a phenomenal team of attorneys and staff, and Marie's part of that staff. She's come on as our Director of Crime Victim Services. Before that, she was working for many years in protective services for the elderly. So the ability for me to attract people like that to my staff increases the ability of my office to do other things beyond traditional prosecution and to try to eliminate crime before it even happens. Prevention is truly worth a pound of cure.
It is always that way.
Particularly in elder abuse crimes where you have financial exploitation, and it's very difficult to get the money back for people once they've been financially exploited. So that's kind of what, as I view the job. That doesn't make me perfect, or that doesn't mean that this is the only way to be a prosecutor, but I view my job as much more than just finding criminal liability and assessing jail terms to people in jail. I feel compelled to work to eliminate the problems that create crime.
Because
And
that crime, there's a victim, but that actually affects the whole community when something like that happens.
It does, and that's why if you look at how a criminal case is docketed, it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus whoever the criminal defendant is, not the person that's been victimized versus the defendant, like you would see in, say, a civil matter where you're seeking a money judgment.
Yes.
So you're exactly right.
So, is there a particular age group that this starts with when you talk about senior crime, senior victimization?
I'm going to let Marie take that because she's had a lot of experience in this area.
Yeah, I actually was with the Area Agency on Aging for about 30 years, investigating abuse and neglect in the elderly under the Older Adult Protective Services Act. And the criteria for that is 60 years of age and older. That's the cases that we investigated. But about 15 years ago, we began looking at the fact that many of the older adults were victimized, and the goal of protective is to reduce or eliminate risk. And we were able to do that in a lot of cases. But what we were seeing is these cases were not being prosecuted, that even though we were able to get the older adult out of a very bad situation, oftentimes the person who victimized them just got off scot-free and would go on to the next older adult. So it was at that time that we started an investigative unit with the DA's office, and actually it's one of the oldest ones now in the state. It's lasted for 15 years. Most of the other counties call them task forces. From the very beginning, we called it an investigative unit because what Gene did from the very beginning, actually as an ADA to start off, came to our program, would meet with us about once a month. We would bring cases to him that we felt there was criminal activity, and once Gene determined that that in fact was true, then those cases were then passed off to the DA's office. And we more or less could do really nothing more on those cases because there was criminal activity. We weren't an arm of the DA's office, we were separate. But what we found from the very beginning was that we were able, through Gene, to prosecute a lot of these cases, and that's extremely important.
So you broke that chain that was happening.
Yes, absolutely.
So what are some of these crimes that are committed against elderly people by, as you said, Gene, a lot of times family members? So I'm going to make the assumption that they're going after the financial part of people, and I guess neglect is a whole nother aspect of that. But what are some of the signs that we should see that someone is perpetrating somebody on one of their loved ones?
Well, we see a lot of, in the unit, we saw a lot of exploitation cases. That was probably, but exploitation, financial cases.
So access to checking accounts and savings accounts and property and so forth?
Yes, and it can happen in a person's home. A lot of times these older adults are isolated and they depend upon someone for care, and so they would depend upon that person to do their banking. And then we have individuals that have access to credit cards, to debit cards, to checking accounts. We saw a lot of theft doing those cases. Sometimes it's family members that just believe they're entitled to the older adult's finances and would also take cards or use cards. And it was normally not just exploitation by itself. A lot of times with the opioid epidemic, we see a lot of grandchildren and children who would take from the older adult.
So this straight out stealing from them, or they would ask their grandparent or their parent for, say, I'm going shopping for you, I need your credit card or your debit card, and then they would just take a little extra for themselves?
That's one of the cases. Sometimes that's what they would do. We have cases like that. We've also had cases where they just blatantly stole from the older adult. They stole the credit card, they stole the debit card. It's just, there's many different types, but we've seen it with family members. We've also seen it in facilities where workers would get access to information, identity theft, steal from the older adult. So I don't think people understand how often it happens and how easy it is for an older adult to be a victim. And a lot of times too, it may be neglecting the older adult. So they steal the money, do not buy the medication for the older adult, do not buy food.
Pay the facility rent.
Correct.
Yeah.
So a lot of the reports in protective services may have come in as a self-neglect. A person goes to, say, a doctor's office, and the doctor notices they're now dirty, they're not taking their medication, behaviors that were just very different from how that person had always lived. And so that might generate a report to protective services. And so the job of protective services is to investigate the allegations, but any other need that protective service caseworker would see when they go into the home. So although you might get a case for neglect, we ask to see financial records, their banking records, and we may then see that there was exploitation.
Well, how is this brought to the attention of either Gene or yourself?
Well, when I worked in protective, I worked in protective services, we had many reports. When I left there, I believe it was almost 250. We covered 3 counties, Washington, Fayette, and Greene, but there was almost 250 reports a month. We did a lot of public relations. My former director, Kathleen Gustine, and myself started the program since the beginning, since the passage of the Older Adult Act in 1987. We began in 1988. And we felt that public awareness was always important to get the word out there. So we talked to everyone we could talk about elder abuse. I ate at a lot of Kiwanis and other dinners to explain, to the public what happened. So generally, we always did receive a high number of reports from the very beginning of their program.
It starts with a report of need.
Yes.
And
Explain that.
what a report of need is it's, and Marie can supplement this, I'm sure, better than I can, is if you suspect somebody's being exploited, abused, or neglected, you can call the hotline number, and they'll take the report, and it'll be investigated by a caseworker from Protective Services within 72 hours. But the report of need is actually, it's confidential.
So no one knows who's
right. When we meet once a month to discuss cases, I don't even know as the DA who the reporting party is. And frankly, it really isn't important to me because we're going to have evidence and information from the caseworkers anyway regarding what's going on. If it turns out to be nothing, that's great. There's no issue. But a lot of times it'll turn, as Marie indicated, they were dealing with about 250 a month. A lot of times it will turn into something that somebody needed placement for housing or medical. Is there anything I'm missing? I mean, I covered a little bit of territory there.
Yeah, it just varies. And once anyone can make a report. Gene said it's confidential.
So a neighbor, a church member, a house cleaner,
Friend,
mailman,
doctor, and those are good examples. We've had cases where, when I was in protective services, we had cases where a mailman would notice that mail was piling up, and we would get the call in protective services. So we immediately gather the information. It would be the name of the victim if they knew it. Sometimes they didn't even know a name, the address where we could locate the victim. And then the cases were triaged. They were screened to be either emergency, priority, non-priority. In the case of someone, perhaps like mail was piling up, to me that's an emergency. Is that person at risk? Are they sick? Could something more have happened to the older adult? And caseworkers go to these homes. They have difficult jobs. They go to these homes. In Southwestern PA Area Agency on Aging, our rule was a caseworker never left a home without direct contact with that older adult. So the caseworkers would have to call in to me and not leave until we knew they were safe.
A report was filed.
Correct.
So this need case was identified.
Correct.
And then you get an assignment by a caseworker at that point.
Correct.
And then there's a knock on the door.
Yes, an unannounced knock. So you can imagine how oftentimes people aren't happy to see the protective service caseworker because we can't tell you who sent us. We're here to look at sometimes very difficult issues, but I was always amazed at the skill of the caseworkers being able to get in the door. Now there are access orders and ways you can get in, but we very infrequently use those. I'd say several times in the course of my career to get into the homes. The caseworkers were usually able to explain to the older adult why we needed to see them and talk with them and get this information. And then they take it from there. And once those cases, they gather specific information. I mean, they look at the environment, they look at the medical situation, how a person is dealing, family members, what the allegations are, is there any other need. Then once that was done, they bring that information back into the office, it goes into the system, and they would staff cases, and we would find a plan for somebody who needed.
So then at that point, you may be identifying whether it's a criminal case and then getting
Yes.
turned over
Yes.
to the district attorney's office, or it's a medical case and then you're providing some reference for that.
And having that relationship with them, Ed, was fantastic for us in law enforcement, because when the report came through police, a lot of times, we can investigate and file charges, but we can't provide services initially. And Protective Services was able to find housing, do medical, be able to provide things that the older adult may need that we couldn't do initially. Sometimes, frankly, the criminal charges were probably the thing that was least important right up front. It was getting this person out of an environment and getting them in someplace where they're safe, and then we could follow up with the criminal charges if need be later.
So the first thing is identifying the signs and symptoms of what's going on there. So what would be some of the things that the average person, the next door neighbor, or the other siblings would look at to identify this type of neglect or abuse?
There's always a change. Something changes in the behavior of the older adult, or not necessarily even the behavior. Again, someone who normally goes to church, they're always dressed and they're happy, and they come in and they go to church, and then a church member notices that they're coming in with soiled clothes or they're disheveled. They appear to be confused. They come to a service an hour early or an hour late, and so there might be some indicator, something different's happening there. Perhaps they're beginning to get a dementia, or they're confused. Fearfulness, that you talk to an older adult, somebody that you've always talked to, and they shared information with you, but all of a sudden they start telling you things like, I'm not allowed to say that, or my daughter told me not to tell anyone that, financial information. Unexplained bruising. You see someone who says that they've fallen. You ask them, gee, you have a bruise on your face, what happened? And they say that they've fallen, but you notice that ambulation is not a problem for them, that they get around. And of course, maybe sometimes people do fall, but it's usually a series of things. People that appear intimidated or fearful. So a lot of times we look for that. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's always abuse, but a difference in behaviors.
So define the difference between abuse and neglect.
Abuse is something physically that happens to that person. That person is hit, they're sexually abused, and with older adults that happens. People think, well, that doesn't happen with older adults. It does. And grabbed in facilities, if they are even dressed roughly. We had someone one time had a concussion because the worker dressed them roughly and knocked their head into the top of the bed.
A worker in some facility they
Yes,
were a resident in.
Yes. And if they, at times, years ago, I remember one case where I actually, interviewed the older adult, and he had marks all over him that looked like cigarette burns, and that's in fact what it was. It was because when he didn't do what he was being told to do, family members were hitting him with a cigarette, and he was being
Unbelievable.
burned.
So is there mental abuse wrapped up in this as well?
There's oftentimes emotional abuse. If you don't listen to me, I'll put you in a home, which really people don't have the ability to do. People have rights, older adults have rights, and you can't just be thrown into a personal care home, but a lot of times that's the threat to them. And it's very much like victims of all other crimes, that the emotional abuse starts, and there's the fear and the intimidation, and that person ends up afraid. They're afraid to tell anybody what's happening to them.
What about isolation? Does sometimes these adults become isolated and no one can
Absolutely.
contact them and visit or call?
Absolutely. We've had cases where older adults, and usually that's a pattern of a perpetrator, to isolate that individual from others, sometimes family members. I think of one case that we had once where a caretaker began caring for this older adult, and she was telling the older adult, oh, don't call your daughter, you don't have to worry about doing this, I'll call your daughter, I'll take care of things. And so she gradually got this person away from this older daughter, the only daughter that this woman had. And then she began, and so the perpetrator was telling the daughter, oh, your mom's fine, or she's sleeping, or you don't need to talk to her. And then the perpetrator began telling the older adult, well, gee, your daughter doesn't call and she must not care about you too much. And gee, you haven't gotten mail, when in fact she was taking the mail. And that's a pattern that we often see, unfortunately.
So
well, I'm sorry, Ed, that actually happened in our first case too.
Yes,
Remember,
yes,
he was
yes,
placed in a
yes,
personal care home
yes.
Based upon a power
Yes.
of attorney. And
I was going to ask you another question, but you brought up power of attorney. What does that mean, and how does that impact elderly abuse and neglect?
one of the things we see as part of a financial exploitation is the abuse of a power of attorney. Now, power of attorneys are very important legal instruments. They're very good for estate planning purposes. If you become incapacitated, it expresses your wishes as far as who's going to manage your affairs, and it basically puts people into your shoes, and they can they have your wallet, and they can do
Pay your
whatever,
bills and
they
keep
can take
the
care of
mortgage
things
paid or
if you're while you're
whatever.
incapacitated. Our first case, which was it was an isolation case.
It was.
I mean, he was isolated.
was.
He had a medical issue. He went to a personal care home. He's telling everybody there that, his daughter had stolen all his money. His daughter, of course, was telling them, well, he's not with it. I'll let Marie pick it up
yeah.
from there, because she actually
It was
saw
our
him
first
when-
case. Our
yeah.
first case in our DA unit. That was 15 years ago, and the older adult is deceased now. But what had happened was he had I believe a brain aneurysm, had been estranged from his daughter for years. One child had been estranged. She found out that he was in the hospital, and she befriended him again, came back into his life, had him sign a power of attorney while he was in the hospital. So he had the surgery, and after the surgery he was fine, but he was placed in a personal care home and actually left the personal care home because he said he didn't want to be there anymore. And we got involved, and this is a good example, was a case of self-neglect. It was that he had left the personal care home, went somewhere else to live. He was living in one room somewhere, and that he really was confused and he needed assistance, and we should intervene and get him back to the personal care home. So when we went to see him and we interviewed him, we discovered that he was not confused, not at all confused. And the doctors, which is often what we use to determine if someone is capacitated, we use a scale that we talk with them, and just common sense, but then protective service workers confirm capacity with doctors. And so we confirmed that he was alert, he was oriented, he knew his outcomes to decisions, was able to make decisions. And so we actually then interviewed the daughter. And most people think perpetrators, I think they have stereotypes of what they look like. But in this particular case, she was very attractive, young, had a job, a very good job, and came in and we interviewed her, and she said to us, oh, I would never take my father's money, because that's what he was asking, what happened to my money. And so after an interview, we discovered that she had, in fact, she gave us a story what had happened to the money. So we had asked her for the paper trail of what she told us. And then by the end of the conversation, she said, well, I don't want any problems. I'll just send you a check on Monday. This was on a Friday. So we were very excited. And on Monday morning, we were...
She called me.
I
She's
did.
like,
I did.
wow, we got this.
I did. Because
fantastic.
this is the first time I was able to say, well, we may have to call the district attorney's office. We may have to discuss this case, our very first case. And so that's when she decided to send the check. So we
It was
were
a lot of money, too.
Well, the first check I think was $60,000.
Yeah.
And so we were so excited. We called Gene, but we said, well, we want to make sure the check clears. So on Monday, our caseworker accompanied the older adult to the bank to set up his own separate account with his name on it. So we were just so thrilled. And then the older adult turned to the caseworker and said, what about my farm? And we were, excuse me? He owned a farm. Back then, it was worth, I think, around $250,000, but now it probably would have been millions with oil
Marcellus,
and with the gas rights. So we were able to pursue this. By this time, the daughter had gotten an attorney, and we were able to pursue this, but we actually got back the majority of his money back from, I think, maybe 10 or 20,000 we didn't get back. And it was really sad because later on, he trusted us, and he learned to trust us. And later on,
He actually came to our meetings.
He did. He did.
For a
He did.
while.
He was very alert, very with it. and was very grateful. And he said later to us, or to me, I was driving him one day to the doctor's, and he said, you know, Marie, that's the only child I had, the only person I really would have to leave my money to. And he said, had she not stolen it, I would have given her anything. I would have given it to her. But she took it from me, and he felt really violated.
Sure.
But was very happy to get his money back and to be made whole again. And that's really the whole, you know, our goal. So it had a very happy ending. And over the years, that was our very first case. But over the years, we've began to look at other very serious cases just like that. And some of our strategies we changed. And so I think we look at this case now, we said, had it been a case today, we're not sure if we probably would have pursued further.
So she sold the farm, basically?
Yes.
Yeah.
She had.
Yeah.
She had.
And,
She had.
and the best part, Ed, and this goes to the title of your show, is when he died.
Yes.
Go ahead. You can.
Well, there was animal groups that were very happy when
He left
Ed
his
hit-
money to.
Yeah.
Left his
and
money
he-
to animal
yeah,
groups.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
did.
Oh.
He did.
And it was substantial.
It was substantial, yes.
Yeah,
And
so-
he and he loved animals, and I believe that he felt at the end, you know, that his animals would fare.
Yeah,
well.
use that word violation, and I think that's probably the biggest insult, because you can always replace money. When you become violated,
Right.
it takes its toll on your health, emotionally first, and then I think
Yes.
physically later. And no one wants to be violated.
Absolutely.
And it's really sad, particularly when you're dealing with older adults, because it could be a relatively, to what to you or me would be a small amount of money that they've been victimized out of. We've literally seen people worry themselves into the grave. because
Sure, it
they
changes the
emotionally-
hormones and changes the stress
emotionally,
hormones and
right.
so forth.
Absolutely.
You know, we're going to take a quick break here, Gene and Marie. We'll be back at on Healthy Pets, Healthy Owners with District Attorney Gene Vittone and the Director of Victim Services, Marie Christinis, and little Tucker over here who's sound asleep over here until I
he's
bother
doing
him.
good.
We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Healthy Pets, Healthy Owners. I'm Dr. Edmund Sulkowski, and let's welcome to the show. You want to scan over there? We'll welcome Hollie. I'm going to mess up your name, Hollie.
Zavallo.
Zavallo. I was going to call you something else for some reason. And we have, of course, Marie Christinis and District Attorney Gene. I'm going to say it, Gene. No, Vittone.
You got it.
We were talking about how I mess up names during the break here, but Hollie is. What's your title in the DA's office?
So I am the assistant to the district attorney.
So basically, we go through Hollie to get to Gene. And Gene's one of those DAs that's actually accessible. We were talking about that. I think most DAs are not. And Gene is so involved in the community that he makes himself accessible. But you kind of screen all of these contacts before they move on to talk with Gene.
I do, because a lot of people don't know that they really don't need to talk to Gene. There's a lot of things that I can direct them to that they really don't need to, you know, his schedule's really busy. But if they do need him, we can get him with them.
And then you all, Hollie also sits on the Washington County Drug and Alcohol Coalition. In fact,
I do.
we sit at the same table all the time.
Yes, we do.
And you're a Canonsburg person
I am.
and a Peters Township person
Yes.
and
Spears.
Spears. So all the
Spears,
area.
yes.
Of course, I was born in Canonsburg and lived in Peters Township for half of my life. But so we're all community oriented here, and everything is run that way in order to help the community get along better, basically.
Right.
So what are some of the things, Hollie, that somebody would call a district attorney's office for?
Well, actually, speaking of the coalition, I actually have parents that will call and say, my child's, you know, an addict. I don't know where to go, what to do. So I don't know why they think to call the DA's office, maybe because their child's in trouble or whatever, but they're just looking for some help. So obviously I can direct them to that as well.
And sometimes that's not necessarily something that would go to Gene, but you can direct it to the proper agency.
That's correct.
And this elderly abuse would be the same type of thing, correct?
Absolutely.
Call right into the district attorney's office and then be referred to the proper agency.
Absolutely.
So in the first part of the show, we were talking about elderly abuse, but there's a different form of abuse that's going around. It's even more widespread than just hitting the elderly, and it's these scams that are going on.
Right.
So, and anybody can take this. What are some of the scams that are going on?
Well,
out there?
the one that's been really interesting and has caused some issues lately was the Social Security scam that was occurring over the past month. We actually put out an alert about it, where somebody would call in and they would say to the person, hey, you know, your Social Security number's been used, illegal money laundering or drug transaction done, pick a state in the South, they would pick a state, and we have to suspend your Social Security benefits. So of course that immediately, anybody that's on a fixed income, that immediately gets their attention. And of course the person that's calling has a solution for them. Well, you know, if you know, that's why we're calling you. We can issue you a new Social Security number. I just need to verify that you're the person I'm talking to with that Social Security number. So if you could read me your Social Security number, we'll be happy to get the process started to get you a new number so that your benefits can be reinstated. And people were actually providing their Social Security number to these folks, and then of course then you have identity theft and all the things that flow from that. There was a small variation on it where sometimes they would ask for gift cards or cash to be sent to them, money orders, in order to do some sort of service to get them a new credit card or a new Social Security number. And of course the closer with all these scams, they follow a pretty predictable pattern. There's an attention-grabbing statement. We are offering you a solution. Usually that solution's money orders or gift cards. And of course, keep this just between us because we're doing an investigation. We don't want anybody else to know that we're on to the criminals. And people were falling for this, and they, as is true with a lot of these scams, they wouldn't say anything because they felt guilty or they felt bad that they fell for it. And the thing I tell people when we do talks with the community, and Hollie's instrumental in setting up those talks if anybody wants Marie and I to come out and speak with them about these scams, is this happens because these guys are pros. They're pretty good at this. This is what they do
for a living.
This is what they do for a living. It's not real hard to make a phone call. You make a couple thousand phone calls, you get about 10 or 20 of those to send you $5,000 or $10,000. That's not a bad return for a criminal. So that was one of them. We've had the grandparent scam, which Marie knows a ton about. She's had that one a good bit.
With this IRS is not going to call you.
Social Security, and one of the things that was particularly criminal about the Social Security scam was that if you had caller ID, it actually showed your local Social Security office.
They spoofed the number.
And what people don't realize is that I can make any number through the internet show up on your caller ID. So just because it's on your caller ID doesn't mean that's who you're talking to.
But the Social Security office and the IRS
they're
are not
going
to call you.
Nor will the sheriff's office and say they have a warrant out for you, or a police department.
I received a call from the IRS, left a voicemail actually, gave me a number to call and said that if I don't respond within a certain amount of time that a warrant for my arrest was being issued. I called back right away.
You're going to get mail.
Yeah.
You're going to get mail.
There's going to be a knock on the door, or you're going to
Sure.
have some certified mail that says you're in trouble and you need to have a situation to resolve.
Right.
So you had mentioned, Gene, that Hollie sets up, and that's Hollie Zavallo. How about I remember that one?
That is very good.
You know, it's like not I haven't known you for a while, and I should know that. But we would call in and say, I have a group, and we would like you to come and talk to us about
Sure.
scams.
Yeah.
So we would just call into the DA office and ask for Hollie.
That's
Yes.
correct.
And then how long does it take for you to arrange one of these?
Normally not a real long, I try to get them in as quickly as possible.
And so
Sometimes they might want a little bit longer time to advertise it.
And what type of groups do you set these talks up with for?
Oh, we've talked to senior citizen
Yes.
centers,
YMCA's.
social groups,
And we're going to
Lions.
service groups.
A
Yes.
personal care home today
Yeah, Boy
that,
Scouts.
that requested us.
Yeah.
And you specifically try to educate people on to what to look for and what the current scams are and what the past scams are.
Well,
And we also learn what's going on
Right.
out there. The Social Security one, we actually were doing a talk in Burgettstown right after I issued the alert, and we actually ran into 4 or 5 people that
Yes.
they were like, "Yeah, I
Yes.
got that one."
Yes.
So it was nice
Yes.
to,
I was
find
out.
out what's out there.
I was out eating lunch last Sunday, and a girl came up to me and said, "I know you do those things on scams. Could you show this to Gene? It's a new scam." So we're recognize the talks that we've done them on the scams.
I just heard this morning there's a new scam going out where you get a phone call, 1 ring or 2 rings, and people all, see this number on the ID and they want to call back, say,
Yeah,
who is
that's
this?
been going on for a
And,
while.
and then it's your phone bill gets hit with these high
Yeah, because it's out of country.
out of country
It's out of
charges.
country charges, yeah.
and everybody's out to grab something for nothing,
Mm-hmm.
it seems anymore. So when we get a phone call, and if there's no message, we shouldn't respond to it, basically.
Exactly.
Hang up.
My protocol is if I get a phone call and I don't know the number, I don't answer it.
Right.
And there's a voicemail, and if they don't leave a voicemail, that number gets blocked immediately.
Sure.
And then you have to listen to that voicemail and make sure that the voicemail isn't somebody like from the IRS, or the Social Security Department, or the Sheriff's Department, because
Right.
again, they are not going to call you. They're not going to give you a heads up.
Right.
That's
They're going to send you something official in the mail, or somebody's going to come and visit you.
So everybody gets targeted. So elderly get targeted. Are there specific scams just for elderly people?
There's,
Grandparents.
the grandparent is the one
Oh,
that
we've
comes
had
to
that a
mind,
lot.
and we get that a lot. And actually, it happened. Gene and I were doing a talk somewhere, and I was running out of my office, my former office in Protective Services, and my executive director stopped me and said, "You need to come talk to this older adult." And I was saying, "I'm late," and she said, "I really think you need to talk to this person." So I walked over and I introduced myself. And when I talked to the older adult, she said, "I just came in here because I was looking for directions for a building in Charleroi because my grandson called me this morning and he's in Mexico that's all she had to say." I said, "Okay." And so I took her over to my office, and she had her cell phone. She was 90, in her 90s, had driven into Charleroi. And so she had her cell phone. He said, "Let's call your grandson." And so she called her grandson, who was actually in another state because that's where he worked. And we got voicemail. I left a message that, I was Marie from Protective Services, and his grandmother was with me, and I believe she was almost a victim of a scam. She wasn't victimized at that point. So anyhow, the phone rang shortly after, and he got on the phone and explained, "No, Grandma, I am not in Mexico. I am where I am doing my job, whatever." And of course, the older adult was very upset. She was very upset, and I was upset because in this particular scam, and it was like the other scam, she had received the call from the individual. It was the scare tactic. It was the trust tactic. Don't tell your mother. Because, and I know oftentimes grandchildren do confide grandparents, so don't tell your mother. I said, "Let me tell you, did he say he had a cold or something and his voice sounded?" She goes, "How did you know that?" I said, "Because it's a scam." And so his voice sounded a little bit differently, and she was willing, and I want to say it was like $10,000 that she was going to send him. She had that money on her in, I can't remember what form, if it was cash or she had gotten, but she had that on her. And what really concerned me was the reason that she had come to the Area Agency on Aging was because the building that she had gone to in Charleroi was vacant. And I was really scared at that point because I was wondering if she
mugging
was
or
set up
something.
for something more than just the crime, that crime. So we were able to foil that, and I actually got to my meeting on time, but we were able to, so that was, a good thing. We were able to stop that.
And another thing that Marie has a lot of experience in, while we're talking about people running into criminals one-on-one, this time of the year, you have criminal groups that are they'll be coming around the area. We run into it where they're doing driveway repaving or home repair, or your roof needs replaced. Hey, I just happen to be doing a job down the street. I got extra material, you need work up there. And while Marie's here, I would ask her to maybe just share what would you do when you have these people come to the door that,
I
they're
tell everyone,
just cold calling you
yeah,
on this.
every training that we do, I say, do not answer your door unless you're expecting someone, you know who's coming. Sometimes they have the little peepholes and they can see who's there. Because oftentimes, just answering the door gets the person in trouble. We've had people who there was a home invasion.
Overpowered.
So older adults are trained to be very polite and trusting of people, but we don't try to scare them, but we try to educate them that this is what could potentially happen. And we were recently talking, even in a high-rise, Gene and I were doing this presentation, and we felt that maybe they were a little more secure until we started thinking about it, that sometimes people that had to punch to come in, other people walk behind them. Right. So they could also be victims. And so we explained to them, same thing with phone calls. What you said was very good advice. What we normally tell people, don't let it go into your voicemail if you don't know the person or you're not expecting that call.
And from a law enforcement standpoint, I'm sorry, Ed, I would like people, if they have people coming through a neighborhood, to call the police, because
that was going to be my
there's
question.
a lot of...
Is the first call to the police?
Right. I believe Peters Township has an anti-soliciting ordinance so that the police can come, check that, make sure these are people that have done what they're supposed to do with the municipality before they're soliciting business in the municipality, because...
Then we should notify the DA's office that this is happening as well?
Well, the police will let me know. Certainly,
Yeah.
you're always free to call, but, the police do the investigation. They actually make contact with these
I just
folks.
want to create more work.
Well, that's okay. Hollie
She'll
doesn't mind. I mean, she's a great team member, and I mentioned people that enable the office to do all the things that we do, and she's a big part of that. But it's important that the police have some involvement with this, because a lot of times you'll have the people doing the distraction burglaries too. And I think you had something similar happen.
I can relate this story.
Yeah.
Then you could expound upon it.
Yeah.
I was home one day in the afternoon, and I was exhausted. I had fallen asleep on a couch, on a deep sleep. I mean, I was out. And I hear this banging on the door, and I go to the door, and there's a guy there, with a box truck with ladders on top of it, and somebody else in the vehicle, and he has an empty jug in his hand. He says, my truck's overheating, I need water. Well, I looked at it, and the hood wasn't up on the vehicle. That was a little weird. So I closed the door right away. I said, wait a minute, close the door right away, and I only opened it partially. I went and got a jug of water and handed it. He had walked away a little bit from the door, and I put it right by the door, and I said, there's your water, and I closed the door. Well, I never saw them put water in, and they drove away. And I later found out from the police that the scam is that they come in the middle of the afternoon when they suspect everybody's working, and they either ring the doorbell like many times, or they pound and make a lot of noise to make sure that someone isn't,
and then they go in.
You're not asleep, or you're in another room and you can't hear the door, so they really forcefully pound on the door. When you don't respond, they put ladders up like you're working on the house, and then they burglarize your house through the second floor.
Yeah.
And they said that was a scam that was happening in Upper St. Clair and Peters Township. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be home at that time. Yeah. But those two guys could have overpowered me. When I stepped out to put the jug down, the other guy stepped out of the truck.
A variation on that, Ed, is knock on the door, get your attention. Hey, I know something with your downspout over here. Why don't you come take a look? While you're around the corner looking at your downspout, two other people or another person's going into your house and taking your valuables, and they're in and out before you're even aware they were in there.
Exactly.
So there's different variations on that. That's why it's important to call the police if you see people just cruising a neighborhood. Don't assume that everything's
Well, that's an
on
easy
the up and up.
assumption. You never
Yeah.
know if your
Sure,
neighbor has somebody
sure.
working on
Right.
their house or so forth.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like I can take care of myself. I have an alarm system in the house. I have a gun in the house. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I have a license to carry the gun.
Sure.
I've taken those steps. I've been trained with a gun and
Good for
so
you.
forth. But you're still vulnerable, and I can see if you're older or you're sickly or
Sure.
you have a disability, you can easily be in trouble. Now, what I did is after that circumstance, I added cameras all over the house. So
Yeah.
you come to the front door, there's a camera. You go to the back of the house, there's a camera.
Sure.
So I took those added measures because I felt insecure after that. I could have been in trouble.
Sure.
Wow.
Sure.
I think too, one of the most important things when we're doing the training is to explain to people it's that they try to get people in that panic mode immediately. And we
Through
try,
fear.
Right, through fear, and we try to de-escalate. They need to de-escalate from the very start. There's no emergency, short of perhaps maybe the police showing up at your door, but there's no other person that there's going to be a crisis situation immediately. So even identification is not enough sometimes. So if somebody comes from a utility company and says there's an emergency, we tell them, okay, close your door and call the gas company, call the electric company. Is someone supposed to be here today? Because most of the time they alert you to those things that they're coming to your home. They just don't show up. They really just don't show up. So if you don't open your door, you don't answer your phone to give the information, you're not in trouble. You can shut it down right there. But again, most of people are trusting.
Well, we're trusting, and we don't expect
wanna
that something
believe.
like that's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And so if someone comes to your door, then you call the local utility first and say, do you send somebody here? I was spoofed maybe 2 weeks ago now, by West Penn Power telephone number. Came through as West Penn Power, message. And I thought, that's weird. I never get called by West Penn Power. So I called West Penn Power. I said, did you happen to call? No, that number must have been spoofed.
Wow.
And so, what are they going to say? You didn't pay your bill, you better give us your credit card number? I'm assuming that's what that was all about.
Yeah.
But these things, technology has changed things so dramatically, and you almost can't keep up with it.
Well, actually, I received a text one day that it was purportedly from PNC Bank, and they wanted to hook me up with mobile banking services, and I needed to respond because there was a problem with the account, and it was a text message. So, of course, I knew what it was immediately, and I contacted a friend of mine that's actually the vice president of security for PNC. I said, hey, is this something that's bouncing around? And he's like, oh my gosh, we're dealing with that. But you got to be very careful, verify things. As you mentioned, Ed, there's a lot of information out there. I mean, there's the ability to data mine, so that when they do the grandparent scam, maybe they checked Facebook and they know your grandson's name, or they know your granddaughter's name, and they're able to call and use the name, or even worse, I have friends that when they go on vacation, they put it on Facebook while they're out of town. It's like, please don't do that. Don't put that information out. There's no need to help criminals. We got enough cases up at the Court of Common Pleas. We don't need to be having people creating new ones. But just a little bit of common sense, trust but verify is a good way to approach things.
Absolutely, and the neighbors looking out for one another, I think is a great approach.
And just getting out there and and if you want to be more aware of what's going on, ftc.gov, they have a great website with most of the scams that are going on. These things have been going on forever, Ed, and as you mentioned, with the ability to communicate, with the technology that we have now, it's just old wine in new bottles. I mean, these scams are probably going on with the Romans, but they were just done in a different way.
Now they're happening.
Now
very
it's very quick. And we're getting hit with so many of them. I mean, look how many spam phone calls you get in the course of a day, even on your cell phone.
I have 2 different blockers on my cell phone, and they still come through.
Oh, they still,
most of them have been hit, but I still get an occasional one coming through.
Right. So.
I had a chiropractor friend of mine that I got an email from one day, and he was stuck in some country, needed some money, and came to my email. Hey Ed, I'm here. I'm in a little bit of trouble, don't have money, da-da-da.
I've had
Can you?
the same
All right.
thing, yeah.
So I knew it was a scam.
Right.
I called him up and I said, you visiting, and started laughing. He says, no, why would you say that? And I told him, well, a year later, I got a text, same type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so somebody had hacked his contacts on his
Right.
phone or his computer, whatever, and cycling through and hitting people.
Well, the one that's still going on, and it's got to be the oldest one, is I don't know about you, Ed, but I've never won a contest I didn't enter.
I've never won that I've entered.
Yeah, me neither. But the lottery scams have been going on forever. My wife had a family member that fell victim to that, and he was older. And in the morning, he was perfectly clear, and as the day went on, he was not so good. And he was being victimized by somebody. He lived alone. His daughter lived in another state, and when she came back, she noticed that there was all this money out of his account, and it was a lottery scam. And he truly believed 100% that he was going to get this money if he kept paying these legal fees or assistance fees or service charges or whatever they wanted to call them. We actually were able to get protective services involved. They did a guardianship on him. We were able to stop the bleeding from his account. But that's another important service that the protective provides, is the legal services for people that don't have an attorney or that are being victimized.
And that's what they do. They bleed the accounts until
Right.
they're dry.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, they do.
Yeah.
And then go on to the next victim.
Right. So
When you were talking about these scams where people come and want to do your driveway or clean your gutters, they always use that phrase, "Oh, I did so-and-so's down the road,
That's a
and they
good one.
told me to come here."
Yeah.
or
That's
I have
another
extra.
sign.
I
That
have
is very
extra supplies that I didn't use on the roof down there.
Yeah.
I can cut you a really good deal. Well, you get what you pay for. The driveway scams, that's been going on around here as long as I can remember. First rain, it's gone. I mean, it's gone, and so are they.
Water paint.
So are they. But you can verify legitimate contractors through the Attorney General website. There's actually a listing of contractors that have been licensed. They're insured. Their insurance providers on there. And I would recommend, if folks are looking to get work done, call references, see who you're dealing with, because once the money's gone, and that's probably the most difficult thing that I deal with on these cases at the DA's office, is we don't have your money. I mean, to a certain extent, if you're victimized, we can give victims compensation if you're on a fixed income. But once the money's gone, trying to identify who these people are, particularly if it's a lottery scam and they're out of country, it's very difficult to do. If it's a family member or somebody we can order restitution, but the reason they're stealing money is they don't have any.
You can get all the judgments you want against somebody if they don't have the money to pay it.
We try to make them pay up, but again, it's the best thing to do is if you can get the prevention up front,
And it happens
and you
more
can
than
stop it up front.
than we think,
And
than we know.
yeah, it does, unfortunately, and it's underreported. I mean, there's statistics out there that it's one of the most underreported crimes out there is financial exploitation.
Hollie, being that you sit on the board for the Washington County Drug and Opioid Coalition, do you associate some of these scams with drug abuse and people's need to support that habit? And then
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And it's really sad because a lot of times it is your grandchild or someone that you have always adored and trusted, and then that trust is broken.
And you feel some obligation too.
That's correct. And a lot, that is something that we'll see too, is that they'll say, I don't want my grandchild to go to jail.
Right.
You know,
And we can work with that.
We had cases where it was family members, and Gene was very good about working with them because they didn't want, usually what I heard working in protective services is, I don't want to prosecute my granddaughter or my grandson, my son, I want help for them.
Yeah.
And that was actually arranged, that they got the help they needed through
With
Gene's
our
office. Yeah.
relationship with drug and
Yes.
alcohol, we obviously have that in place now through
Yes.
the coalition to do that.
Well, we're at the end of the show. This was, I
Great.
think, extremely informative show. Went very fast. At least for me, it did.
Same
I want to
here.
thank Hollie Zavallo for coming on. She was a last minute. We asked her to sit down. I don't think she was prepared for this, but I thank you for doing that.
No problem.
Actually, this would be the contact person before you talk to Jean, so she's a wonderful person to deal with. Marie, Christinis, I thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
So much information you gave out that I think will be helpful for a lot of people.
Thank you.
District Attorney Vittone, I got to
Thank
tell
you,
you, it's
buddy.
always my
Thank
pleasure.
you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're doing such a wonderful job for this county and for the city of Washington, and you're a committed person. I know you're up for election. I'm going to give my personal endorsement, which I don't do politically. Get out and vote for this man. We need him here in this county.
I got good people.
So
if I didn't have good staff like Hollie and Marie, I couldn't do any of the stuff that we do. So I'm really blessed.
You're doing it. You put
So.
you put a good team together, and you're doing a wonderful job, and we
I'm proud of
appreciate
them.
it.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you so much for watching Healthy Pets, Healthy Owners. Remember, a healthy pet is a happy pet, and when you're healthy, you're happy too. You know, you could listen to us live every Saturday morning on AM 1250 The Answer at 9 o'clock for Healthy Pets, Healthy People. We'll see you next time. God bless.